Japanese composers, the way that they're raised and trained into this industry, they're expected to write a lot of music very quickly. Writing music like within a few hours, 50 to 100 songs in 1 month, which is absurd. Wow. It's a lot. So one thing that we've started to demonstrate with our company is we're able to get more negotiation and better opportunities for our composers. So if it means also that it's helping them earn more money in the process, heck yeah, I want to figure that out.
Hey there, and thank you for tuning in. We're excited to bring you another great conversation today. If you like the show and want to support us, please hit the subscribe button so we can keep bringing you great content week after week. And if you're feeling extra generous, give this video a like and share your thoughts and comments down below. Thank you so much. And now, let's get into it. Welcome to Unpacking Japan. I'm Toby, and today in the studio we sit with James Landino. Thank you so much for coming.
Thank you for having me. Do I look here? Do I look there?
You can look anywhere you like. You have plenty of cameras. You can talk to our audience. You can talk to me.
This, yeah.
You're a game and anime composer.
Yes.
We talked about this just before we started. Yeah. Composer is very important. You create the original music for a lot of games. People may have played some animes as well. We're going to dive into that side of music production in Japan.
Cool.
And like with all my guests, I want to start our conversation with asking what brought you here in the first place?
Man, what brought me here? You know what? No one's ever asked me that question before in that way. I think it all starts with just my love of video games and Japanese culture, or even before I even realized what Japanese culture really was, right? I started writing music when I was 12, but my earliest memories of video games started when I was like 3 or 4 years old. My babysitter at the time, my nanny, we would come over to her place sometimes, and she had a Sega Genesis and a Super Nintendo, the Famicom.
Cool.
And so my first like memories I can think of as a child was Sonic 2 and Legend of Zelda: Link to the Past. And that was just the beginning of everything. And I think my first memories with the idea of video game music was so my family, they got me the original Game Boy, the first generation version, right? The huge brick. And the original Game Boys, they had a speaker built in, right? And so before I knew what headphones were, I used to put video game, like the cartridges into the Game Boy, and then I'd put the speaker of the Game Boy on my ear like a conch shell, because I was just like, whoa, I love this. Is cool. This little chiptune video game music. I had never heard anything like it in my life. So that realizing that memory when I was older tuned me into, I've always been drawn to this without even realizing it, because so I was born in 92, and in the 90s, at that time the internet was still not even really a thing yet. It was just barely, going into the millennium was the boom of music and the internet, the World Wide Web, right? So my exposure to music and what I thought was music was just limited to the radio, which was a lot of top 40 to top 40 contemporary music. So the difference of musical exposure from your standard 90s rock music, which at the time I was just so not into, and then over here you have really cool eclectic video game music on chiptune or sound fonts from the Nintendo 64 or Super Nintendo, inspired by jazz fusion bands from the 70s and 80s, but now they're graduated to being a composer at a company in the 90s. So that exposure definitely was the beginning of everything of what Japanese culture could be and what video game music could be to me. And so from that point onward, I'd always wanted to work on video games. It wasn't music yet. In fact, I hated music. As weird as that sounds, as a composer sitting with you right now, I hated music. And but I loved video games. And it wasn't until I was about 11 years old at a computer camp, because I computer camp to make video games, and someone introduced me to a game called Dance Dance Revolution. I'm like, what is this? What is this music? This is the coolest thing. Eurobeat, hardcore. I've never heard anything like this in my entire life. And that kind of flicked a switch in me of like, okay, well, I love video games and I love this video game music. What if I made video game music?
That's a pretty early age to get into that. And you mentioned that you started kind of making your own music or composing your own music at the age of 12.
Yeah.
But up until that point, you hated music. So I imagine you didn't have any musical training. So what do you start making when you're 12?
So my parents, I think part of the reason why I disliked music was also the fact that my parents required my older brother and I to play piano, or I played piano. The rule in the house was you had to play one musical instrument until you graduated high school. For me, it was piano. And I could not stand the piano. I hated classical piano. I hated recitals. The idea of playing a piano by yourself on stage to 100 people in a church was like the most anxiety-inducing thing you could imagine.
I had the exact same experience.
Really? Oh my God. It's terrible.
Yeah.
And with classical music too, because everything is so explicit. They want you to play something the exact way it was written by some guy 300 years ago. Could not stand that. But so that was what I thought music was, unfortunately. And I think, but so I had a bit of that piano skill to then translate into getting music composing software. And that was the lateral for me to take some of that knowledge and then apply it to writing music. So Dance Dance Revolution was a very popular series, right? And so around 2004, 2005, there was this website that emerged, at least that I found, called Flash Revolution, which was a Flash-based version of Dance Dance Revolution on the internet. And it was a fan-run website, and they made a Flash-based version of DDR. And on the forums, back when forums were a thing, I miss those days. You could submit music and charts, like gameplay of the music, so that anyone on the website could play it. And I'm like, that's so cool. I want to get my music in a video game. I want to make a video. Like, that was my way to feel like I'm part of this creative process. So I was like, oh my God, I'm going to go learn with this software I just got. I'm going to go learn how to write music and get it approved on this website. And I think by the time I was like 13, I got it approved, my first song. So by 13, I was already a game composer.
So you submit songs to this, and then people may pick it up for their own games that they were working on and kind of...
Yeah, so it was all fan run. So different composers across the internet would submit their own music for approval, and then if they were picked by a series of judges online, if you were picked, then you're in the game. Now anyone around the world, and at the time there was probably over 10,000 active users every day. It was a really big website, and so that idea of oh my God, tens of thousands of people are listening to my music on this video game on the internet was just the coolest thing for a 12-year-old me. It's the coolest thing for me as a 32-year-old, and I've been doing this for 20 years. 20 years, I've been doing one thing. At
what point were you then thinking about, I want to move to Japan?
As far as moving to Japan goes, I think when you're 12, 13, right, it's it just becomes this cool dream, right? You don't really, and even in my 20s, I think it was just kind of this, oh, it sounds cool. But I think when I was turning 30, about 3 years ago now, I had met someone who had a lawyer that believed they could get me an ARS visa. So I went through that process, and I realized, oh wait, this is a real thing I could do. As at the time of this recording, I'm not married, I don't have any kids, and I'm like, I think this is my last chance to kind of do something a little crazy. I didn't have to go to Japan, because by that point in my life, by age 29, 30, my career was pretty much locked into America. As far as I was working with Japanese companies while in America, but so to me this felt like what a cool story. I mean, regardless of whether it goes well or not well, what a cool story to be like. You know what? The cherry on top of my adventures as a composer in this industry is now I get to live here for some time.
Did you have an idea of you want to work with or as part of these big Japanese video game production studios and compose music for them, or did you want to kind of keep your independence? You mentioned you came on an artist visa, so I guess it's hinting towards doing it independently here.
Definitely, yeah. So the answer to your question is I did want to stay independent for several reasons. So by that point, so I have a music production company called Rare Drop, and we do music production, we represent artists, and we do music publishing for game soundtracks and for other visual media. And so by that point in my career, we had found the reason why the company exists is we had found that Japanese companies want to work with Western composers, and Western companies want to work with Japanese composers. And even before I had moved to Japan, I was making those efforts to bridge those gaps, because both parties were very excited at the idea of it. And so me moving here just makes this way more possible, for sure. But so as far as my independence goes, that was always very important to me. But also I had learned very quickly, my first trip to Japan, I had just graduated college and I was 20 years old. And I got a scholarship from I'm spacing the name of the IGDA, is the International Game Developer Associations.
Okay.
The Japan division has a scholarship program, where you got some kind of funding, and then you get to go visit a bunch of game studios during Tokyo Game Show.
Oh, cool.
And so, for better or worse, when I won that scholarship and I got to go visit the studios, I quickly realized I don't think I want to work at a studio. The at least at the time, the studios I visited, the vibe of it was just not really, something didn't click for me.
Describe it.
It felt like I was in an accounting firm, but for video games. And the people I had seen there, just, they seemed locked in, I suppose, but they were, it wasn't the kind of, growing into adulthood and you're like, I want to work on video games, right? Maybe one expects people who work on video games to be a bit more bright, maybe, or bright, like in terms of like their energy and aura, they may be a little more fun or whimsy.
More colorful, creative space.
Right. And I think that was my first kind of real facing that of, oh, Japan is not what I thought it would be. And it wasn't like that deep of like a negative thought, but I was like, okay, I realized this might not be for me. I'm happy to work with Japanese developers or work with other developers around that region. But maybe I want to do it my own way. I've always been a very big proponent of doing things the way that feels right to me. Not just creatively, but also I think just in how I make decisions. And I've felt that when people give me advice on the industry, they're usually like 5 years behind. So I've always felt that in order for me to find success in what I do, I just really have to make my own decisions and kind of, steer the ship, with not knowing where the ship's going sometimes.
So when you moved to Japan, it wasn't your first trip. You had been here before, but what was the experience like for you to hold your artist visa and to be like, okay, well, I'm actually relocating. I'm living here now. So work-wise, you kind of keep doing the same, but it's a different life in Tokyo.
I mean, that being said, getting the artist visa just hits. That just hit, I think, especially as a musician. It felt like a nice like badge of honor for myself that like, because in order to get the artist visa, you have to have credentials of working within Japan or within the Asian industry, I suppose. And it was just a nice badge of honor to feel like, yes, like even the country acknowledges that this person is of reputable, has a reputable body of work, and we want them in this country to make more cool things in this country. That felt good. That felt really good. So regardless of, which of course we can talk about, but regardless of maybe the other inner workings or nuances of leaving Japan versus visiting, I think just by that literal visa, it was like, I felt like no one can ever take this away from me, that I accomplished something that I never thought would be possible.
And then you get here and you have the validation of your work. So let's talk about that work a little bit. You have been working with Japanese companies beforehand. You originally started by submitting your own kind of creations to the forum. But when came the point where you kind of worked for the first time on a bigger Japanese game or anime for which you kind of composed the music?
So I've had various. So are you referring to the differences between like when I would work from America versus Japan? You think?
You're still back in the United States.
Well, so even in my position now, I'm never working directly like within. Like so when I worked 10 years prior, I was working for a game studio in Boston called Harmonix. They made their most biggest titles would have been Rock Band or Guitar Hero, and I was a developer in house working within the studio in the trenches. And those were really great memories. But in truth, I'm really happy being on my own independently. And I made sure that when I would move to Japan, I would still maintain this independence. So honestly, in my position, it hasn't changed that much. There are some nuances, of course, and that comes down to the just the literal way of Japan or Japanese game industry handles certain nuances or bureaucracies. One difference I noticed. So one thing I learned about a year ago, so I had wrote a song for a project, I actually collaborated a song on a project, and the way we collaborated originally, it was going to be that my co-composer was going to write the melody, and I was going to do it was a bit 50-50, but he was going to write more of the chords and the melody, and I was going to do more of the production of it. But it was still 50-50, so to speak. But the primary thing to note is that he wrote the melody. And I did not notice at the time until it came time to discuss crediting for work. And in Japan, the way they view it is you are credited only as a composer if you wrote the melody, nothing else. If you wrote the chords, if you did the production, if you did any other kind of inner workings, doesn't matter. You get arrangement. So even if you wrote chords or you wrote the actual inner workings of a song, doesn't matter. The melody is king. If you wrote the melody, you're the composer, and everything else is arranger. And that ticked me off initially because I'm like, well, wait a minute. Like, I just let you have them. Wait a minute. Like, would have discussed writing the melody with you if I noticed, because this feels like a collaborative process and I want the credits to reflect the collaborative process. And that's not, and I don't believe anyone was being kind of nefarious with me. I think they just generally assumed this guy knows how this works, and therefore, oh, composer gets, this credit, arranger gets this credit. But thankfully the co-composer, he quickly realized this, that I did not know. And he's like, oh, well then you can help write this part of the song. And then we both got the same equal credits. But that was a big like note that I would have never thought about until maybe it was too late. And I'm glad we caught it beforehand. So now thankfully the song is credited as me and the other composer having both co-composer credits. Because the word composer to me, I think is a very powerful one in our industry. When you say the word arranger, like even right now, right? I think earlier before this podcast, you had asked me, oh, how do you want to be addressed? Like producer, right? Or composer. And the word is composer. Because a composer, I think a lot of people feel like, oh, like the person who made it. I think it's a little bit more of a zhuzh to composer than maybe like a producer would. And obviously I'm a producer too, and I know amazing producers. But for me, I think it's more important to be known as a composer than say an arranger in this context.
Is it kind of like the director and the producer in cinema, for example?
I don't think it's the same. The word producer, so, as I'm sure you talk with other people in this podcast, the word producer can mean many different things, right? And I think that's almost the problem with this. I say producer, and I think unless you're of that industry, you're not going to know immediately what kind of work was involved on that assignment. But if you're a composer, immediately you have some idea this person was involved in the notation creation of that song. So that's why I always make a point whenever I go to conventions or events or podcasts, I try to let people know, like, I want to be referred to as a composer in this, because sometimes I'll do conventions around the US or in Canada or wherever, and they'll label me as a DJ because I'm performing some of these conventions as a DJ. And it's not a bad thing, but I think a DJ does not tell the audience what I actually do. A DJ, they just think, oh, he's a DJ. You may have some idea of visual in your mind of, okay, the guy who just does the beep boops on the stage, right?
Yeah, I always wondered what they actually do behind. Sometimes it feels like it's just a playlist running, and sometimes I feel like they're doing something, but we don't know what they're doing.
Oh yeah, it's yeah. And there's a lot of, I think, as far as it being a DJ goes, that's a whole other topic we can get into. But on as far as crediting and what you identify as, for me, it was really important to help remind people that, like, I'm a composer. Like my body of work, the reason why I'm even being booked for this convention should be because the body of work of music I've written and composed.
So that kind of experience was an eye opener for you, happening here in Japan.
Yeah.
And you just explained how important the choice of word is. Are those words used the same in the Japanese context than in English? So like when they refer to the composer here in Japan, what is understood as the composer and what is understood as a producer, is it the same, or do the responsibilities kind of vary from the United States?
To my current understanding, the titles of the work you do on projects in Japan, if you're a composer, you are just the composer. If you are the producer, you're just the producer, and the mixing engineer, and so on and so forth. And so another project reminded me of this, actually. So I once was a composer and producer of a song. They asked me to do the whole thing from front to back, like composing, producing, mixing, X, Y, and Z. And so I also asked if I could be in the vocal session to record the vocalist for this. They said yes. But what I found out later was that allowing a composer to be involved in the vocal recording process was very, very, very rare. They had never actually, normally they actually tell people no. But in my case, they told me yes. My only guess is because I am a Western person. And so maybe they thought that, okay, well, maybe he has these expectations and we'll allow it. And maybe, we'll allow that to be part of the process. But normally, and I talked to other Japanese composers about this point, and they were like, wait, really? You were involved in the vocal recording process? Because they tell me sometimes, so they're not normally in the process. And then so when someone else does the vocal recordings, sometimes they don't get ideal vocal performances from the recordings, but that's just what they got to do. Shoganayo,
Yeah.
And it can't be helped.
I was thinking about that. If there's someone, the composer, behind a specific song, I imagine that person has a vision or an ear for how it should sound in the end. Yes. And that includes all the levels, the vocals, the music, everything. The pace.
Yeah.
So if you're only involved into like actually writing the melody, I don't know, like on a partition, and then someone else plays it, someone else mixes it, and someone else records the voice, and you're not present in any of these stages, to what extent is it still kind of your creation, or true to your
Right.
vision for this.
And that's the difference that I think I've been fortunate enough to kind of navigate to my advantage. Because normally when I compose music for video games or anime, as you know, from the West, so to speak, the expectation almost always is I'm overseeing this whole song. And yes, and sometimes I will get people to help me with the mixing here or do some sound design there, but still it's my vision that I'm overseeing with my name on it. And in Japan, even if that's still the expectation of this person composed the song, the other credits, you know, they're just so much more boxed into the literal skill set of composer. And the way it's been communicated to me from other composers is, you know, you just have to, you are in a position where you can't be helped and you have to trust the team. I don't necessarily agree with that perspective, but I understand from their eyes why they're in that position, because they literally cannot do anything about it. You know, what they get is what they get, and they do their best to make it work.
You said you originally worked for Harmonix on Rock Band.
Yeah.
And then kind of went your own way. When was the first time you worked or collaborated with a Japanese company or a Japanese composer?
Ooh, the first time I worked with a Japanese company, I'd have to go back. Give me like a second on this one. I want to say the first project. So I believe the first time I worked for a Japanese company, it would have been probably on Lightning Returns 13.3. And I wasn't a composer at the time. I was an assistant recording engineer. So I went to Berklee College of Music in Boston from, I think, 2010 to 2013. And during that time, I met a few individuals, one of which was he's a composer, orchestrator, and just audio director, Shota Nakama. And so he, who I believe still lives in Boston, but so at the time, we met, and he knew that I was someone who was really passionate about the industry and working on Japanese projects. So he got me onto his team and what they were up to. And so at that time in Boston, he was, because Berklee and Berklee College of Music is a pretty just has a lot of talented young musicians who also get excited about video games and anime. So his idea was, what if I got all these young talented musicians to do the recordings for these big orchestral recording soundtracks, and we'll do it in Boston because it's cheaper to get young passionate players than say maybe get established players, right? It was a win-win for everyone. So all the young guys, all the young students who are passionate about video games will do it for cheaper. As opposed to say some older, maybe more talented veterans who don't know what a video game is or don't care about video games. He was like, well, I'd rather just get things done for cheaper. And then also the people on there are like, heck yeah, I get to work on Final Fantasy. So that was me in that sense, but on the recording side. So I was involved as an assistant recording engineer with for Lightning Returns and for Kingdom Hearts 2.5 HD Remix. Those are my first two, I think, real work exposures into like what Japanese the Japanese style of making game development, or how people even communicate in business in Japanese.
What were some of the things back then that kind of really stood out to you? Like, oh, this is how they do it, or this is how it gets done.
I think the first thing I can recall, I'm not going to name the individual because I can't do that part, but the way how during recording sessions for one of the projects that we had done, how everyone was at the whim of one individual. Yeah, I distinctly remember during recording sessions that one of the staff at Square Enix was this had a lot of particular notes about things. And in my experience at the time of working with Western studios, I think there was a bit more collaboration of input in what works, what doesn't work, and what we should do. Not in this context. This was a matter of if this one individual says that they want something, you're going to do it. And I had no real that didn't really affect me at the time because I wasn't directly reporting to that individual, but it was still kind of witnessing it, like, oh wow, like everyone, the hierarchy and the bureaucracy is incredibly understood here. Do not deviate from that respect.
And that was still done in Boston, though.
It was in Boston, yes.
Interesting.
Yes.
So what goes into producing? These were songs, music for video games.
Yeah.
And you were talking about how at a young age you were putting the Game Boy to your ear and listening to that, which has a very unique ring to it, different from the rock music that was on the radio in the 90s.
Yeah.
How do you compose a song that is meant for a video game as opposed to be listened on the radio? Or has this changed now too with
songs that get popular in video games now also being played on the radio? And
It's a good question, and it's one that can be answered, I think, 1,000 ways. We'll be here all day, I think, with a lot of that nuance.
we have time.
Oh, all right, let's go. I think, the lame answer is it depends, right? Because every project in games or anime calls, mostly in games, calls for a different thing as far as the assignment goes. In my case, because my body work has been focused on music games, a lot of rhythm games, a lot of music titles involving audio. And so as a result, when I'm composing for those kind of titles in particular, let's just use like a rhythm game, for example. Like I didn't write for DDR, though someday I'd like to. Like for Dance Dance Revolution, if you write a song for Dance Dance Revolution, literally the gameplay is determined by the song you write. So if I write a more intense melody with more dense notes, in theory, it's going to be a more difficult song. And that's what really excited me about music games at the time and still now is I have a direct relationship with the gameplay. So as I'm writing songs for rhythm games, for example, I'm thinking about in my head simultaneously, what would the chart is like the gameplay that, in DDR's context, like the arrows that come down, and Rock Band, the gems that come down, those are charts. So I'm thinking to myself, okay, well, what would be an interesting chart? If I was playing a rhythm game right now, what would I want to be playing? And you don't think about that, obviously, when you write a song for radio, because there's no, maybe it would be cool if there was, but there's interactivity to radio. It's a passive experience. And it's fun to write songs for games where you have there's such an interactive relationship to that. On other games, such as No Straight Roads, there was that element of the music has direct interactivity to the gameplay, but then also in No Straight Roads' design it was a game about the battle of the bands, EDM versus rock. And so as you deal more damage to the boss, who is an EDM musician, the music changes in real time. So now I have to think about, all right, if I'm writing this song, I need to be mindful to how could this song work in other genres, in this case, rock. So you have to think about music in a completely different angle as you're writing it for you're writing it for one version, but you have to think about the other context at the same time. It's truly a puzzle. And in a case like No Straight Roads, there were songs where we had 3 different versions of one song. So I'm writing one version, being mindfully aware of this song should work in this genre and this genre also, by how I've written it. That's the puzzle.
That's a completely different approach than just making a song.
Oh, yeah.
How does the cultural context come into play there? I imagine if you work especially with a lot of Japanese companies, they may create a song with a Japanese audience in mind first. Do they interact with the music differently than, let's say, if you put the game in front of American players?
In my experience, no one's directly told me. It's funny, and because I'm a Western composer working on a lot of Japanese projects or projects out of Japan or projects out of Malaysia or China, in almost all cases they reach out to me because they explicitly say in the emails, we want a Western sound. Now they also say that with the asterisk of the fact that I'm inspired by a lot of Japanese music. So they still are tuned in to, okay, we know that James writes music, with that inspiration and flair. So he understands our culture. He understands that whatever he writes is going to translate well to a Japanese audience. But because I'm a Westerner, they also understand too that I'm not directly inspired by that one sound. So I think they really appreciate and value that I'm not quite like how a Japanese composer would normally write. I think that's to my advantage. And I think whenever I talk with other young aspiring musicians who want to get into the industry, especially what I'm doing, is I always remind them, don't make sure you lean into the things that make you unique. And sometimes your uniqueness is literally just, from where you're from and what your environment is. I think sometimes people who want to work in the Japanese industry, I think maybe, in my opinion, they misunderstand that, oh, well, then I got to write just like a Japanese composer does, which I think they miss the point, because if they become just like a Japanese composer would write, why not just hire a Japanese composer?
So how do they write, and how different is it for them how you would write a song?
I don't think it's necessarily, to say there's a difference, I think is a challenging one to say with perfect words. But I think because of course every composer will write differently no matter what, right? But I think in my experience, a lot of Japanese composers I think they stick very close to the things they know and like, and rarely do they deviate outside of that. I think, and when they do deviate outside of it, I think it's a particularly big deal to them. Whereas in my case, at least, and I think more Western composers are more willing to try and experiment with other genres. That is my anecdotal opinion on it.
So a Japanese composer that writes, let's say in the context of video games, more classical music for video games will kind of get really good and people will hire him because he's a classical video game music writer. And then the other one might be like the rock music writer for video games, and they kind of really specialize in those niches. Whereas you might balance a little bit between all the genres.
Yeah, I think the key word is, if they like orchestral music, the Japanese composer is going to write exactly that one thing they write and will rarely ever deviate from that. If there's someone who writes dance music or EDM music for video games, they will only write one or two genres of that style. And then if they deviate from that, it's a particularly big deal. And though I do think, as a broad advice to anyone who's listening to the podcast, I think it's good to have a specialization in your craft, for sure. I think that's actually a key point here. In my experience too, you also need to have, it's called a T-shaped skill set, where you're really good and known for one thing, but then you still have the breadth and diversity of all the other things. And so I think that's a big difference of maybe a Western composer will have more to show for diversity, even if they're known for a few things that they're good at. Whereas a Japanese composer, I think, will really stick to this is the thing I do, this is the thing I'm really good at.
Music being a very collaborative process, as you've described it before, you've got so many people involved in the process. And with your own company, you kind of help bridge that cultural differences. So Western companies wanting to work with Japanese composers, Japanese companies. Right. So how do you kind of create this collaborative environment when people are used to such different ways of producing music, of writing music, of working?
I think in general, collaboration requires, in my belief system, collaboration, if anything, requires understanding the other person, right? And every time I collaborate with someone, there's always something different, One example I can think of is I was working once with a vocalist on a pretty big game project, and so typically with vocalists, you're going, if you're working IRL on a project, you're going to, go into the same room together and shop ideas around, and, maybe they'll sing a melody and then you'll kind of, collaborate, okay, how about this? Okay, how about this? So what about this line? So back and forth, right? It's a collaborative, like songwriting camp, so to speak. But in this example, I would say about 30 minutes into the collaborative process of she and I being in the same room, it became very clear to me, this person wasn't comfortable. And I asked her, I was like, hey, actually, real talk, should I just leave and then come, and then we'll talk about ideas later? She was like, actually, that'd be great. And and so in that 30 minutes prior, it wasn't like she made bad ideas, but it was clear that she wasn't like in it, the way I think I wanted her to be. And I realized, wait, if I just leave, I think she'll actually crush it. And sure enough, within 2 hours, she banged out the idea and it was awesome. And so it's funny how I always like that story as an example of collaboration, because I think sometimes people think collaborative is like, you kind of all parties involved throw paint at a wall and see what sticks. And not always. Sometimes collaboration, it can be just I give you and then you come back to me later. It can be as hands off as possible. So as far as collaboration goes, it's really every project just has a different story.
How has it changed for you now, moving to Japan a few years ago, kind of being here underground with a lot of these people you collaborate with, where before you might have, sent files over online or maybe met up here and there after a quick flight. But now you're here, you can meet people, you can knock on the production studio's door in Tokyo or around Japan. Has this kind of changed the process of how you work or opened to new doors for you?
I think for me, not particularly, only because, so when I lived in America, I was still working with developers in Malaysia, China, Singapore, Japan, so on and so forth. So it's funny how, when I lived in Los Angeles for the 6-7 years I was there, not once did I ever get a project that was local in LA. All my projects were in Asia. And so my whole, overwhelmingly majority of my career is built off of the remote work. So, as for better or worse, nothing's really changed. I'm still working remotely. I have those Discord servers, those Slack servers. So that's what works for me, and that's where I'm most comfortable, I think.
Seems like the video game production, it kind of hints towards that industry really being in Asia and less so in the US or in Europe as it may have been before.
No, I'd say if anything, I think video games is just so global now. In a really cool way. so many game companies. The last few games I've worked on were actually the studio is entirely remote. There's no real like office where people kind of like collaborate in, for better and worse. Because I really miss the times of like being in the trenches, like, you know, we're all in the room together in the cubicles and just trying to bang out like the coolest idea. But there's also a lot of positives too to being fully remote. And, you know, working on a project like Omega Strikers was a big project. That was, the studio was, you know, they had a Canadian office based out of Canada, but the entire team was all around the world. You know, I was in LA and then Tokyo, but then the artists, one artist might be in Brazil, another artist would be in Korea, another, you know, programmer would be in the US. It was like just so diverse. And with our company, Rare Drop, that's also very true too. All of our composers, I think we cover, like outside of Antarctica, we cover every continent, which is something I'm really proud of how diverse our team is, because I think just that's where the entertainment, not just video games, but all entertainment is coming just so diverse.
This may be a very technical question, but we're talking about music here,
Yeah.
sound. And if the entire team is remote, depending on each person's audio equipment, the way they hear the music might be completely different. I recently purchased a hi-fi system at home.
Nice.
Because I enjoy the music, and I wasn't sure what to get. So I went to the big electronics store, and they had a sound room, and the guy was nice enough. He was like, okay, I'll play the same song on all of these speakers.
Cool. Yeah.
I was just like, without a word, by how different each speaker sounded with the exact same system otherwise and the same song.
Oh yeah.
So when you make a song and you need it to sound a specific way, but you send it to people that are all over the world that might have a different headphone, that might have a different speaker that they're listening on, doesn't that affect the end product to an extent?
It does, and it's a fun technical question. So the simple answer is there's a one of the last processes when you're writing music for anything is called mastering, and so you know, you have the production, you have the mixing, and then you have mastering. The mastering is the phase in which you're actually doing final tunings and balancings, so that it works on as many different speakers or audio experiences as possible, right? And you know, you're never gonna be perfect, right? But you do your best. And so almost all game soundtracks, you know, movies, film, TV, they all have this process called mastering. That's very important in one way, shape, or form, right? Because yeah, like if, for example, if you're playing a game on the Nintendo Switch, like handheld, you're gonna be most likely hearing it on the Switch speakers. That's a completely different musical experience than you playing it on your TV, you know, with a Switch. So it's just, and as a composer, actually at times, I have to sometimes be mindful to that as well. This has more to do with things like bass, because bass is a frequency range that's usually the first to go when it comes to lack of fidelity on speakers. For example, if you have an iPhone and you play a song on your iPhone speakers, you're not going to hear much bass. But we have little tricks that we can do to make you feel like you're hearing bass, at least, so that way you can get that sonic feeling without it being actually present.
One of the projects you've worked on, or one of the games, I think it's called Tunism. I don't know if I pronounced that
Yep,
right.
got it.
That's actually an arcade game.
Yeah.
So in that case, it comes from the arcade machine where the sound comes from. Was that a completely different experience for you to kind of think about that experience, sound experience?
I think for me at that point, well, so I will say, like, Tunism is a very special place in my heart, because that was the first game that because that game is all around arcades in Japan. That was the first project, you know, where that I got to have my song, like that was the first time I really felt like, oh, like I'm involved in the Japanese industry in that way, where I could go to the arcades, like right now as we speak, we could go together and play a song from the arcade here. So that game has a special place in my heart. And as far as, you know, as how you would listen to it in the arcade, it's the same kind of story, because if you go to play Tune Them right now, like most of the advanced, you know, players will play with headphones and have their own setup, right? So when you're writing music with headphones, that kind of standardizes the whole process. But yeah, there's still a little bit of that nuance too. You have to be mindful too when you're writing songs that are playing on speakers from the cabinet, and then you're also in a loud arcade, which has other speakers of other cabinets in the arcade. You know,
a lot of sound all around you.
But yeah. So in that for me, in that context, I'm probably going to make something more melodically driven, because at the very least, if you can't quite hear other details of the songs, as long as you can hear the melody, which is usually how for gameplay, how charts will be written to like the notes will correspond to the melody that you're, you know, trying to input. That's typically the play, is have it be melodically driven.
You said that when you started composing your first few songs and you had them out there and people were kind of playing games with your songs, that was like a great feeling. You brought up Omega Strikers a couple of minutes ago. Those songs have like tens of millions of views on YouTube, so listens for people. And I checked the comments, a lot of people were like, this has kind of impacted me a lot. How does that make you feel when you have like reached that scale of people listening to your music?
It's amazing. Although, you know, like even you just think that, again, it reminds me, it's like that's just so cool. And what I love about the story of Omega Strikers too is that game was not supposed to have that kind of soundtrack. So originally, the original plan was that they reached out to me to write one song, and that one song was going to be the kind of like how there's an anime opening for, you know, an anime. They wanted to have an anime opening style song in collaboration with Studio Trigger. You know, Studio Trigger is a very accomplished animation production studio, and they've done tons of cool stuff. And so somehow the Omega Strikers development team, they got Studio Trigger to write the animation opening, and they got me to write the song with them, which is just the coolest thing. But I wrote the song, and that was that, right? But so about a month or two later, actually while I was in Japan for a work trip, I got a message from the creative lead asking me, "Hey James, so we have this trailer coming out to announce a new character. Can you write like a minute song for this trailer?" And I was like, "Yeah, sure. When do you need it by?" He's like, "On 2 days." I'm like, "That's not gonna happen. No way." Nuh-uh. Fun fact, one thing that remains true about the Japanese industry, which we can talk more about in a minute, is the deadlines in Japan are much shorter than anything else I've done in the West, typically. But so I got this deadline, like a 2 days time deadline. I'm like, that's not happening. I'm in Japan. There's just no way. So I got my friend Garrett Williamson, who's also an amazing composer. And I was like, "Hey, real talk, can you just jump on this and just like, you know, knock this thing out?" And he's like, "Yeah, sure, man." Crushes it in 24 hours. The song comes out for the trailer, and Garrett does such a good job that people in the comments were like, "Whoa, this trailer music is so good. When's the full version coming out?" There were no plans for this at all. But the response to how positive that song was, then the development team was like, "Wait a second. So we did a song for this one random trailer for this new character. What if we did trailers for all the characters and they all had their own songs?" And that was the genesis for me becoming the music director for this game soundtrack, where I was involved in writing songs, every character's theme for every character in the game. And that kind of, I think that really added so much depth to this game, just from a story and narrative perspective, but also from a player experience perspective. People have now so much more attachment to these characters because of a character theme, you know? And it just really goes to show how powerful music is, because even though the Omega Strikers development has ended as a live service game, it's still, the game is still online. You can play it for free. The development of it has ended, but yet people still listen to this music every day, even though the game is over. And it's amazing just how even when a game has completed, people still have this strong attachment just because of the music for a game project.
2 days, that's the deadline. You said they're much shorter here in Japan than they are elsewhere.
Yeah.
What is a typical production process for a song? You get a request to make the main song of a video game that plays on the intro or something like that. What is it usually like, and how is it in Japan, and why is it so different? How do the processes differ?
So when someone asks me, "Hey, I got this thing," I'll say another way, actually. When someone asks me, how long does it take you to write a song? I ask them, how much time are you giving me? I've done deadlines, that were a few weeks to a few months. I've had deadlines that were 1 hour, and that's a fun place to be in when, someone's like, "Hey, we need a song right now within the hour." And I told them, "Okay, you'll get a song that sounds like I made it in 1 hour, but I'll get you something," and I think that's a key difference between someone who is a professional and those who maybe do it for enjoyment as a hobby, is you have to lock into the life of a deadline and that pressure while still executing, what I think is good music. And I try to tell a lot of people who are fans of video game music and anime music is, if you like that one song from that game or anime, what most likely is also amazing is that person probably made that song in probably a day or 2 days, in like 1 day, 2 days, maybe a few days. And they made a whole soundtrack in that scope. So that person made your favorite song of all time, my favorite song of all time, in that crazy deadline. That's how good some of these composers are, that I think no one talks about. So in my experience, as far as Japan goes, Japan by far has usually the most strict, tight deadlines. of the so when I worked on I almost NDA'd myself. Hee but one of the projects I worked on, definitely for sure was like, here is this project and you got 2 days, go for it. One song I did for another project, I gave me 5 days, and on day 2 I got COVID. So you find a way, and
So you have 2 days to make a song. What's the process? Is there a process, or do you just kind of start listening to music and you have ideas? So it could be this beat, it could be this pace, and then you just play around until something clicks?
My process with intense deadlines is, having something to submit is king. So immediately, if you tell me right now, hey James, we gotta get you this, we need a song in 24 hours time, go. I'm like, all right, I'm gonna literally just pull up a piano patch, hit play, record, and I'm gonna record the first thing that comes to my mind, from start to finish. And it could be the coolest thing of all time, it could be the worst thing of all time. But now when I hit stop and I have a 2-minute song or whatever the length is, great, I now have something I can give you. It could be, it will be good, probably not, definitely not. But at least I have something to give you, because the worst thing you want to be in is something where you can't give someone something. And so my philosophy is you write horizontally. And so by that method of how I just described it is, I'm going to just write the beginning, middle, end, all the way through, just get something down. And then from there, I'm just continuing to chip away and evaluate and write horizontally. Start, middle, end, start, middle, end. Maybe I'll add more drums here, I'll add more, guitars here, whatever. But that's my approach, is that no matter what, as I keep revising, it will get a little better and a little better with the time I have. But no matter what, I have something to give you.
You said that in majority of cases, people's favorite songs from video games may have been written in a very short amount of time. Yes. Is there something that makes a good song by definition, or is it a very subjective?
I think it's totally subjective. There are songs I think could be, better or worse, so to speak. But really, if I even talk on this point more, I'll feel like an idiot, because the songs that I think are awesome are the least popular, and the songs that I've written that I think are awesome are often the least popular, and the ones that I think I'm not really proud of have the most plays of any song ever. So who am I to judge or know what works, what doesn't work?
A couple of minutes ago, you mentioned you nearly said something that you're not allowed to talk about because you're under NDA,
yes.
Which might bring up an interesting topic about NDAs in Japan.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So a lot of these projects, you work for games that are not yet released. Mm-hmm. People are not supposed to know that they're about to come out, unless maybe a trailer has been already put out there. And of course, you can't say about the insides of the game, which you may get to see a little bit because you're writing the music for specific scenes or characters introduction. How are NDAs used here in Japan? Is it the same as you used to in the United States? Are there significant differences?
I would say in Japan, they take NDAs more seriously than America does. I think we all take them seriously. I'm not out here saying like to the cameras, I don't take them seriously. I definitely do. But I think that Japan has the added layer of not only is this NDA, but also don't even try to there have been a few edge cases where even taking a photo of me being at that studio was not okay without some ample permission. That's the layer of NDA. Most people, it's like, okay, NDA is like, just don't talk about the project we're working on. In this context, it was, don't even say that you were even here right now. Don't even let the world know without you telling us. And eventually I got to post the photo of me being at that studio, but it was that layer of permissions and requests that maybe isn't directly an NDA, but you probably shouldn't do it. And that's definitely one thing that Westerners, I think, for Westerners who want to get involved in the industry, I think, and this goes more into, I think, in general than just say Japan versus the West. I think if you want to work in the industry, you have to be mindful to not being a fan, at least showing that you're being a fan. And what I mean by that is, of course, you can say you like things, but as soon as you're going on, twitter.com or Instagram or whatever and saying, this game sucks, or this thing, I didn't like this. Yeah, as a fan, you can do that. But when you're in the industry, now you're actively disparaging, or talking negatively about something that probably a colleague made, or you might meet this person at a games show. I think sometimes Westerners particularly, have a lot more things to say. about maybe projects from Japan, because maybe they don't put the two and two together of like, oh well, I live here and they live there and they'll never hear my comments. You'd be surprised. They find out. They do find out about things that people say, and
Especially through Twitter.
Oh my gosh, Twitter's the worst thing. Twitter's the worst thing. I tell everyone of the feedback I have told to my younger amazing composer friends who are learning, I tell them, stop tweeting this. Not because they're in trouble, not because they did anything wrong per se. I was like, you need to put this tweet down because they're going to, if they haven't seen it yet, they're going to see these things and they're going to feel a way about it because why would, just hypothetically, why would Sega hire you if you're talking badly about some of the games that Sega has made? Chances are they're not going to hire you as much. And so that's a consequence, I think, of when you transition to going in this industry, particularly I think into the Japanese industry where there's a lot more weight on even the opinions you say about games.
Is it an industry in Japan where everyone knows each other more or less? That, once you start to have your name out there, that you've worked on certain titles, people know you within the industry as you're the composer, did this and this, and they'll follow you, they'll listen to what you say, they'll see your opinions on things, and therefore you may get opportunities or not, or you may run into other people, as you said.
I think that's a true example for sure. I've definitely met a lot more, I definitely met a lot more of Japanese creatives I respect that I live here that I never thought I'd be able to meet, right? Which is an amazing thing. But also in the back of my mind, I'm like, oh, wait a minute. So I met this person who worked on this Sonic project, and obviously I have no ill will towards this person, but of course, as the fan of me, has thought to myself, wait, like, there's just certain things I've said about these games that may be directly criticizing their work. And I don't want them to be offended. I don't want them to be, because I don't mean any ill will, right? But I think some people have different, pride or different, feelings on their work they've done, and so I never want, the fan in me obviously never wants to offend anyone. And but unfortunately, I think some people who come to this industry, they come into it being a fan like I did, and I think most of us do, who are in the game industry. But I think there's that transition that has to be understood as you get into it.
Up until now, we talked a lot about composing music, working in the industry here in Japan. But you don't only compose, you also work as a DJ. Mm-hmm. You go to these conventions like Tokyo Game Show, and you get on stage and you play some of your songs, some of other people's songs, I imagine. Yeah. How is that for you?
Amazing. So the genesis of me becoming a DJ, so going back a bit. So as I told you, I hated piano. I hated recitals. I hated the idea of being on stage was horrifying to me, to be by myself on stage. I never wanted to be on stage. I was like, I'm gonna be a composer because I'm behind the scenes. I can just kick back and write my songs and be a nerd in my room and no one has to look at me. Amazing. And it wasn't until my first convention I went to was MacFest in 2014, I believe. A friend and coworker of mine brought me out to MacFest. For those who don't know, who's in the podcast, MacFest is Music and Games Festival in DC, and it is really what it is. It is a music video game festival. It's the largest one in the world. It has about 20,000 plus people that come out every year to celebrate and party. They party to video game music, which I did not know existed 10 years ago. And I don't, it's just an amazing concept of itself. So I go there year one, just to kind of not know what to expect. But I'm like, whoa, like, oh my God, there's all these people here and we're all partying, we're all getting drunk or XYZ to video game music. This is the coolest thing ever. And then I get invited to the backstage to so at MacFest, and every year they have kind of like a rave where, there's DJs, performing and live to over 1,000, 2,000 people. And they're, remixing, different styles of Mario, Zelda, or whatever, like EDM versions of video game music. And I'm like, oh my God, 2,000 people are going crazy for Super Mario EDM music. I'm being a little cheeky about it, but that's what it is. And I was like, this is the coolest effing thing I've ever seen. I want to do that. I had no idea that I could be a DJ. Because at the time EDM was becoming more popular. This is 2014, right? So artists like Porter Robinson and Skrillex and Zed, like that was in the forefront. And I was like, oh my God, that I could do that. I could be performing video game music and remixing video game music. I want people to celebrate video game music with me like this. This is the coolest thing. And that totally shifted my perspective on how, as a performer, from me being like, I never want to be on stage, don't perceive me ever, please, to wait a minute, please perceive me in this context where I want everyone to go crazy for Sonic music.
Can you remix any song? Are there any regulations around this? Like if you take Super Mario and you just remix it and play it on stage?
No, you can do whatever you want. And well, this maybe goes back into a conversation about Japanese culture, maybe. But at least in the West, you can do whatever you want. You can go off, you have fun, you do anything you want. Without I don't know how not PG we can go, but just you can go as crazy or out there as you want to, because at least in the West, you can express yourself however you want to as far as DJing goes.
But in Japan, maybe there some of the regulations kind of prevent you from copyright laws, I imagine, from using certain songs in certain ways.
There's certain mindfulness for sure. As when it comes to copyright, licensing, and I think in other contexts, just for example, not saying I'm advocating this, but like if do you know the thong song, for example?
No.
That's fine, but you get the idea, right? It's something a bit rambunctious, a little bit whatever, and if I'm a DJ, I could be like, what if I put thong song to Sonic the Hedgehog? I could do that right now. If I have an hour to kill, I could find a way to make it work. But as dumb as it sounds. But some people in Japan might be like, don't do that. Because now, even if it's a DJ having fun, and even if it's for laughs and giggles, if I'm the DJ, especially because I work in the industry, that's going to look away. It's going to look away like, oh wait, so is this person, taking our copyright and now just transforming this with some really inappropriate song? Like, we don't know how I feel about that. And that this particular example is unique to, I think, DJs. But I think that, again, as you go into the industry and you're, transforming, even if it's for celebration and joy of the IP, that you have to be mindful to that. And I think Japan's even Japan more so being mindful to when you're remixing things. The term is bootlegging. When you're taking something without permission, but you want to create something for fun, in this context, you're not going to sell it. You're not going to do anything illegal, from distribution sense, but you just want to make something for fun. Especially in the anime industry, bootleg remixes are very popular, but it's something to be very, very mindful to, I think, as you work in the industry like that.
How has this kind of shaped your relationship with composing music to kind of remix songs to play on stage, as opposed to consider them for being suitable for rock and EDM for a boss fight?
Say that question one more time, just so I understand better. So, like, how do you
exactly? So you were writing songs for video games before, and you gave the example of the game. I think it was No Straight Roads, where you had to write songs so that it can be played in different genres for a boss fight. But now you're playing to be on stage. You take a remix for a song. You want people to dance. You want people to have fun. How has this kind of shaped your relationship with writing music? And
I think I've become a much better composer as I've become a DJ, and that's advice I've told a lot of composers and producers who make electronic music, because I've been DJing now for over 10 years, and I can tell, it's not like a bad thing, but I can tell when someone writes like a dance song but they've never DJed before, and it's not a bad thing. They approach it differently. But I'm like, okay, well, if you want people to dance to this, you should start DJing, so you can understand better literally in real time how people are experiencing and moving to your song, or unfortunately in some cases lack of moving, and that really clued me in as a composer, because that, like, case in point, as a composer, when I'm writing music in my bedroom and then whatever, it's done, and then the game comes out and you hear the song in a game, I don't really get to see your real-time reaction of the song, like very rarely, but not really. And in DJing, I could see it in real time. Like sometimes I've songs that I've written for games, like work in progress, I'll get permission from the developers, like, hey, I'm gonna do this thing, do you care? And they're like, no, it's fine. And then I'll play in the club, because sometimes I write music that's intended to be like club music for games that also has that similar application, and I'll try it out, and then that's kind of it's a rare chance for me to see how are people reacting to this song I just wrote, like that's not even done yet. And it's a really cool experience to have that and like learn from, like, oh, see, they're moving like this right now and they're reacting like this. Okay, after this, I'm gonna go back and readjust it.
Tokyo Game Show, I think you performed there. Was this one of the biggest stages you've been on, or?
Tokyo Game Show. So Tokyo Show, I did after parties. So things like that, like for like that and Anime Expo, there's a lot of after parties, because these huge conferences, there's tons of parties, right? And so I've DJed like at places like Mogra. Mogra is, for those who don't know, Mogra is a nightclub in Akihabara that is an any song club. They focus on that sound, but of course they go into video game music and other kinds of fandom. But they were well known for being, this is the any song club where you get to hear any song remixes. So Tokyo Game Show, typically when I would travel for work, I would DJ there. And they've always been like, they're great people, they're awesome. And for people who don't normally go to nightclubs, who are maybe are a fan of nerdy things like video games or anime, I would definitely recommend going there, because it's not like what you envision a nightclub to be. It's very friendly and welcoming and just full of people who are interested in the same things you do, celebrating and partying to things that you also are interested in. So, but as far as the biggest stages go, like I say, like probably like with 3,000 or 4,000 people in attendance of some of these events. Like there's one convention called Anime Week in Atlanta that has like 4,000 people, and that one has a strong memory to me because I would DJ this whole hour long set, but at the very end, just for the fun of it, I decided to play not remix, just by itself the original. It was Escape from the City, which was a very popular song from Sonic Adventure 2, and I ended my whole show with that. And when I played that, the entire 4,000 people, everyone in the room just went ballistic. They went bonkers. And it was just a really touching moment because, I was doing all these cool remixes all night here and all things there. Sonic has a very, I love Sonic the Hedgehog music. And so it's a very special memory too, where at one point I just cut the music entirely and everyone was still singing along to that song. That soundtrack has a very special place in my heart. And knowing that thousands of people were just having that moment, like you don't get that. I dreamed of, as a child, I've dreamed of this idea that people could celebrate game music and anime music like this, and you just don't get that until these past few years, where I think more people are starting to catch on that video game and anime music can be so much more.
So when we grew up in the 90s, video game music was only audible on like the Game Boy and Sega consoles. With you now playing this on stage and other DJs as well, and having conventions like MagFest where it's kind of the center point, nightclubs dedicated to it, has video game song kind of become its own genre, so to say, and found its place alongside jazz and rock and
maybe this is a whole other layer of conversation. Is video game music a genre? I go back and forth on this. I think my current stance is that the answer is technically no, because video game music can be anything, right? You could play anything, like literally, and that's something that I've actually been trying to do in my recent years as a composer. Is I want to try getting away from what people think can be video game music and pushing what else can be game music, right? Literally, as soon as you put a song in a game, it is now video game music. But of course, I think because when people think of video game music, maybe they think chiptune, or they may think certain composing stylings like jazz fusion. I think when people think of video game music, they have a certain idea in their mind of that, like a very melodically driven, Japanese inspired, if not Japanese written music. But so as a result of that, I think more and more composers, young composers especially, are inspired by video game music. But I think one thing that I always want to remind these young composers is all these composers in the 80s and 90s who wrote your favorite songs like Mario and Zelda and Sonic, they were in bands. They were just band nerds who wrote in bands, and they were inspired by Cassiopeia this or T Square that or whatever, or even some Western music even, right? They didn't listen to video game music because it didn't really exist yet. And so I always try to remind young composers especially to not just listen to just video game music of what you think video game music is. I always want to remind them, like, make sure to take inspiration of normal music, because I think it will push the sound and expectations of what it can and cannot be. In this case, can, because there's no cannot.
It's been over 20 years since you kind of made your first song, composed your first song. How has your music evolved compared to then and now? And how would you describe your music today?
I think, what's funny is I think, like, I go back and listen to songs that I wrote when I was like 14 or 15 years old, and I'm like, I'm just copying myself 20 years ago. I'm a hack fraud, man. I had the best ideas when I was 15. I just figured out now at the age of 32 how to take 15-year-old me's ideas and make them like sound more professional. But I go back and I'm like I remember actually like last month I was writing a song for a project, and I'm like, I already wrote this song like 10 years ago. What am I doing? Most composers, I think, if you interview them, I think they'll say something similar, where they're just like, man, we just fucking stink. Oh, young me was so much better.
With the industry kind of changing so much and the types of game also changing, how do you see it developing over the coming years? What kind of styles are emerging, and what can people expect from the music side of things?
I don't know. And I think it's a good thing. I think if I knew the answer, that'd be kind of boring, wouldn't it? If you knew the answer to, like, let me tell you like how the industry is going to evolve, and what's musically is going to change, what's the fun in that, right? So I think what's amazing for all the pros and cons of this current industry landscape, and there are a lot of pros and cons currently. I think one nice thing is that there's just so many different niches and pockets and communities and just all over the place. There are more games now than ever before. So when people when I hear discussions of people like not really being, they're like, oh, like there's not as many cool games out there talked about as there were previously. No, there's tons of cool things. You may just have to look a little harder or talk to other people about it. And I think the same applies to the music too. There's so much cool music out there in these game soundtracks. I think and I think because there's so much diversity, there's just a lot. There's a lot to look forward to, and I couldn't tell you the answer.
What are the things you'd like to work on, though? If you could choose some projects that you'd like to be part of, or maybe games you'd like to write the music for.
I think if I had to pick one right now, it would be Dance Dance Revolution. I think that would just complete the whole circle, right? It started with Dance Dance Revolution, and then it hopefully not ends, but I think it just kind of puts a nice little cherry on top of the whole experience. I've been very blessed with this career through luck and hard work and sacrifice. A lot of luck for sure. And for me, I'm in a place where I can say, like, I don't have really many more dreams left to do in this space. When you do something for 20 years, it's basically your whole life is one thing. So I'm always thinking about what's next for me past game music. But I think at the very least, if I could walk away with Dance Dance Revolution on my belt, I think that would kind of, I think, complete when the book is closed. And I do think that will make me feel good about that book.
So you're kind of already thinking about the second book to work on, maybe, in a way.
Yeah.
Maybe some of our listeners are thinking about how to write this one, how to get into this one, writing music in Japan. Would you have any advice for people to kind of break into this industry here?
Oh man, the answer is yes, definitely. That topic could be covered in so many hours of discussion. I think the most important thing before anything else is find your specialty. Find your sound and find your specialty. I think because in this landscape particularly, there's so many there's more composers than ever too, right? Now there's more games than ever. There's also more composers than ever. There's more creatives than ever before, because of this current internet landscape. So my advice is that at the end of the day, if you want to work on, for example, first-person shooter FPS games, the company that makes the FPSs, they want to hire the person most likely who is the best FPS audio person they can find. So if you walk into a room and if you walk into an interview for some developer that makes FPSs, and you're like, hello, I've spent the last 5 years doing FPS audio, making portfolio for this and doing sound alikes that, or just showing passion and proof of that idea, they're gonna be like, heck yeah, this is the exact person we need. I think sometimes I get emails and DMs all the time, for advice and stuff. And I'm always happy to help. But the one I try to steer people towards is, I think they're like, oh, I do music and I want to do video games. And I'm not here to say that's not enough. What I'm more likely to ask them is, what kind of game do you want to work on? What, like how you asked me just now, what's like the game you want to work on? What's my dream project if there's any left? And 13-year-old me was music games, rhythm games, Dance Dance Revolution. That was the goal. And I largely have stuck to that goal, if not through DDR, but through other music projects similar to it. And so that's kind of the same kind of advice. I think if you have a certain game you want to work on, that is the best, compass, I think, to guide you on the first important steps.
Does it make a transition within the industry difficult later down the road? If, let's say, you've been a FPS game music composer and now you want to do racing game music, completely different genres, completely different way people are listening to the music while playing, and they might want to hire the expert in that field.
Absolutely, and something that I deal with too at times. I think that the way I look at it is the hardest part is getting that first credit. I think getting the first credit, getting that first door opened for you, I think that makes it, of course, there are challenges to making the lateral change to a different part of the industry. But I think people will feel like you're already in the space of some kind if you already have a few credits to your belt. And that's what worked for me, because I started out in rhythm games. And then I've eventually branched into other things like platformers, racing games, and the like. But I think that for me, I had to have the first initial few so that people knew, okay, this person, maybe has an erasing game, but clearly their sound, they understood, but they saw, at least in my case, that they could hear my music in a racing game and they can see the vision. And more importantly, they know that I'm reliable, I'm trustworthy, because I've worked on these other projects with these companies. Because I think a lot of times the hardest part of being hired on any project is this person reliable? Are they good to work with? I always recommend to young composers that you can't just be a good composer and think that's enough. You also have to be a good person. Which sounds kind of obvious, but if you're the best composer in the world, but you're a jerk, no one's gonna hire you. Vice versa. I know, vice versa, they're absolutely gonna hire the person maybe who is a really kind or hardworking person, maybe not the best composer, imaginable, but they can get the job done and they're just easy to work with. And I know, that's definitely the case.
So get good at something, get your foot through the door, and work on the first few projects and have your name on the credits, so people can see you're reliable, you're trustworthy, you worked on those projects. And then transitioning within the industry is difficult, but much easier than kind of
Definitely.
having a broad entry point.
And in Japan for sure, because I think Japan also has very much emphasizes this catch-22, where they don't want to work with you if you haven't already worked in the industry, right? So, and there's that trick you need to figure out and I don't have an immediate good answer of what that trick is. I think everyone has their own path to it, because once you get that first credit with a Japanese company that maybe has some weight to it, like a Sega, a Square Enix, or something else, now it's, oh, cool, you've worked in our space. Great. We already trust you. And I think that's just so important, because I think what gives me an advantage in my position as a Westerner is the fact that these companies want to work with a Westerner, but they also know that I'm trusted because I've worked with these other companies, and that the relationships I have with other Japanese professionals, they know, oh, this guy is good because he's worked with so and so and this and that. That's the biggest thing, because as I think maybe this podcast has covered, trust in Japan is so important.
Super important.
Super important.
And hopefully the credits you have built up until now will lead you to one day work on Dance Dance Revolution, so we can see or listen to some of your music in that game.
Yeah.
James, thank you so much for coming, sharing your story and insights. Do you feel like we covered the topic pretty well? Is there something you would have liked to talk about that maybe I didn't ask about?
I don't know yet. Man, putting a spot like that.
Yeah.
Shoot.
Sometimes people have something that they really wanted to talk about that I didn't ask. Sometimes they don't. And then I think that means we had a pretty good conversation.
I think, you know what? I actually want to add to this one, and this may be going to the more technicalities of my industry. Here's something that I learned that I thought was fascinating from living in America to Japan. When I started to get opportunities to work with more Japanese clients, I noticed a pattern that the budgets available for me were much less than, say, working on Western projects. And I would argue there is a lot of truth in that typically the budgets in Western development are not always, but typically much higher. And what I later then learned actually was, and this is through our company's work and also talking to my friends who are in the industry. So a Japanese composer friend of mine and I worked with the same company at the same time. It was the same kind of project. It was very similar. It was the same kind of project, same kind of assignment, but they both reached out to us for different things. And so we got lunch one day after we were both done with this assignment, and my composer friend goes, "Hey, James, I have a curiosity. I saw you worked with this company. I just finished a thing with them. How much did they pay you for this project?" And I'm like, "I got paid this much." He was like, "Really?" "I only got paid this much." And what it became very apparent was that we start to implement with our future negotiations and working relationships is if you present yourself as a Japanese present yourself like if you present yourself like you understand the Japanese industry and you speak the language super well and you do all the Japanese formalities, they're going to treat you like a Japanese professional, which is not bad per se. But then you lose a lot of advantages you get for being a foreigner. You lose a lot of advantages for being a Westerner. The reason why I believe why I get certain rates and opportunities I do is because I am a Westerner. And I take that as a good thing in my position. And so one thing that we've started to demonstrate with our company is we've actually started to bring on Japanese composers to work with us on Japanese composers to work with us on projects, whether Japanese or not. But because we're doing it through a Western route as opposed to the Japanese traditional communication route, we're able to get more negotiation and better opportunities for our composers, which has just been awesome. Because I'm always a big proponent in helping people make a living at what we do. And so if it means also that it's helping them earn more money in the process, heck yeah, I want to figure that out.
That sounds like a recurring problem across the creative industry within Japan, that payment for independent contractors, freelancers, companies, whomever, are much lower than they would be in the United States, for example. And a system like yours, company established in the United States, but hiring local Japanese composers, but kind of giving them an opportunity to benefit from more fair compensation.
Yeah, and vice versa too, because we when we talk to Japanese developers and publishers as a Western entity, they also have some expectation of, oh, well, we don't want to offend them with a lower rate, so they're Westerners and they have a sense, they believe we have some sense of premium to what we do. And so that also, I think, incentivizes them to be like, all right, well, we're going to get James or his company or whomever, and we'll prepare a more premium budget for that.
Do these companies simply have lower budgets for music composition, for example, or creative assets generation? Is it because there's less value put on it, or is it just the standard in the industry is simply lower for this?
I think that, and I'm saying this from an anecdotal and maybe just a bit off the dome of just my take on this. I think for one thing, I don't think it's just the budgets per se, but I do think that Japanese composers, the way that they're raised and trained into this industry, they're expected to write a lot of music very quickly. Hence, I think earlier point about deadlines, especially in Japan. So many composers, especially anime has some really intense deadlines, where it's like you're writing like 50 to 100 songs in 1 month, which is absurd. Wow. It's a lot. And these guys and girls are writing music like within a few hours. They're just cranking out music, ranging from, whatever, how good or bad the music is, like they're cranking that stuff out because they have to. And that's how they're taught and raised into the system. So by that definition, if you're writing 100 songs in a month, for example, I'm not gonna say the value in an absolute sense, but like the perception is, well, this composer can write a song in 2 hours, therefore this should be cheaper than, say, maybe another composer from the West who spends a week in a song or 2 weeks in a song, right? Time equals money in that sense. And so I think that's why some of these budgets for anime projects or video game projects are so low, not from a disrespect of the craft itself, but their expectation is, well, great, well, they can write the song in 2 days and 2 days time equals this one amount of time. Right? They just look at it that way. And that's how I see that, I think.
So a very pragmatic approach rather than a value-based, like, oh, this song has this much value to us, right. But rather this song represents this much work, so you're going to be paid for this much work.
Exactly. And sure, maybe there is some negotiation sense to it, whether taking advantage or not, I can't say with certainty. Mm-hmm. But the reality is, if I say no to a budget that's very low, then I'll say, okay, well, then we'll go find the composer who will do this for that amount. And I think part of being a professional in this industry, in my position, some of the challenges, when do you say yes and when do you say no to these opportunities? That's the kind of compass that you learn over time of what works for you. But that's definitely something I've had to navigate for sure since I've been here, is when do I take the job that is unbelievably below the rate that I am comfortable with, but I know that, well, but I know that I can afford the time sink into it. There's that puzzle for sure.
And sometimes they are also just passion projects. Well, you see, I put you on the spot, but you gave me a very interesting answer, which brought some more food for thought and maybe something to consider for people that want to work with or into that industry.
And I think, I want to leave on a positive note, if there's anything on this, because, like, of course, I love what I do. I really enjoy the fact that I get to work here and do business here. I've gotten a lot of amazing opportunities because I live here. And I always implore people who are listening to this podcast or anywhere when I talk to them is, if you want to work in this industry, you got to come here, and it doesn't mean you have to live here and do the way I did it, but you should take some real time here and, sink a few weeks here and start meeting people and come back regularly. And that may be expensive, may be difficult, but it's worth it, because I traveled here every year for 10 years before I even settled here. So maybe it's probably an obvious kind of suggestion or advice, but it's one that I think some people it feels like sometimes they don't want to hear. They don't want to hear the advice of, I want to work in games and anime. How do I do it? Well, you got to go to Japan, then you got to speak the language. That is the truth.
That is the truth.
That is the truth.
James, thank you so much for coming and making a stop here in Osaka on your busy tour around Japan before heading back to Tokyo. It was a pleasure having you and kind of listening to your insights into the video game music production industry and how you compose some of your most popular songs. So we'll put all the links in the description so people can go and listen for themselves. And maybe some of them have already done so while playing the games that the music is in. Thank you again.
Yeah.
Thank you everyone for listening and watching. This was Unpacking Japan, and we'll be back in the next episode. Bye.
Thank you so much for joining us today. I hope you enjoyed this episode as much as I did. Please hit the subscribe button so you don't miss out on future conversations. And we'd love to hear from you. Share your thoughts in the comment section down below. And if you enjoyed this episode, here are a couple more that we think you'll enjoy. Thanks again for your support, and we'll see you next time.